Is the EU about to collapse? The war in Ukraine caused more pain than the European Union can handle. Not only because the 27 EU states and another 14 non-member states are collectively footing billions of euros in military and financial aid to Ukraine every month, in addition to billions more to accommodate millions of Ukrainian refugees, but also because of the harsh and swift sanctions they imposed on Russia. The energy and economic crisis in Europe, in general, and the EU specifically, is extremely dangerous and can possibly lead to the breakup of the Union. This leads to asking a very important question. Is the EU heading for collapse? What will happen if such an event occurred? And what are the solutions? Before the Ukrainian war, throughout the past 20 years to be specific, the relations between Russia and the rest of Europe have been nothing but great economically speaking. Russia provided them with cheap oil and gas among other resources, which enabled them to maintain a very advanced economy and accumulate immense wealth. Of course, Russia also profited handsomely. General trade between the two sides was quite good. The EU exported to Russia about $100 billion of products in 2020, and Russia exported to Europe about half of that amount, excluding oil and gas. Now the trade between the two sides is nearing zero, and Russia went from providing about 4 to 5% of the EU energy supplies to a mere 9%. This meant that the EU, as of April 2022, lost nearly $100 billion of annual exports to Russia and access to cheap Russian energy. The EU can overcome all the negative effects of the Ukraine war and sanctions on Russia, except when it comes to energy in addition to uranium, which the EU needs for operating its current and under-construction nuclear power plants. But let's clarify something very important. The EU is not a country nor acts or operates as a country. It is mainly a single trade and freedom of movement zone. The EU main economic engine is the single market. It enables most goods, services, money, and people to move freely without any restrictions. However, each EU state is still an independent country with its own army and government. So, will the EU collapse as a result of the current economic and energy crisis caused by the Ukraine war? First of all, economically speaking, the entire European continent is experiencing exactly what most other countries on Earth are economically going through, including China, the UK, and America. Inflation is high and won't subside. Manufacturing jobs are in decline. The trade deficit is increasing. Unemployment is rising. Energy prices are increasing. The cost of necessities are becoming, in many cases, unbearable. National and consumer debts are skyrocketing and exceeding or are near 100% of the GDP. The entire monetary system is littered with bad debt and defaults. Bankruptcies are on the rise. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider. Central banks are unable to propose logical and cemented solutions, while also losing the battle of balancing quantitative easing and tapering. Crime rates are on the rise. Shortages are crippling some industries. Stimulus packages are becoming almost ineffective in solving inflation and poverty issues. Problems in the supply-demand chain are persisting. Individual savings are at all-time lows. Real estate prices and rental rates are in decline. But these issues, except the energy crisis, did not begin with the war in Ukraine, but rather with the spread of COVID-19. Of course, you can argue here that 2021 was a great year economically speaking for the EU, most rich nations, and emerging markets. However, governments, central banks, and experts from all corners of the planet were aware of and talked about how these issues will become a harsh reality after the end of the COVID-19 crisis in 2022. But they did not expect Russia to invade Ukraine and complicate the scene with a serious global energy crisis that would hit places such as the EU so hard. Also, many renowned experts actually predicted the Ukraine war, but their words fell on deaf ears. So is the EU heading for collapse? Very unlikely, because contrary to common belief, European countries are more aware than ever that going solo while a behemoth like Russia is next door, and the rising Chinese sphere of influence is growing, can result in individual states being bullied or even economically conquered by these superpowers. This leads us to ask, will the EU break up due to economic collapse of its heavyweights, Germany and France to be specific? The answer is, there is a 50 by 50 chance of that happening. The EU lost one of its top heavyweights after Brexit. This led to additional burdens on the remaining two heavyweights, France and Germany, as they had to fill the gap in terms of keeping poorer EU states economically sound via preferable economic treatment, loans, and other incentives that are literally free. Right now, Germany and France are exposed, and their economies can go bust if the other EU states did not pull more weight into the Union's budget and their own economies. However, most EU states would disagree with that sentence and point out that Germany has just injected a €200 billion stimulus package into its economy. They would also point out that Germany is more concerned with the amount of gas the EU can import and store, without giving much attention to the price issue. They say that Germany can handle the bill, but they cannot. Additionally, French and German banks have lent more than $1.2 trillion to the most troubled European countries such as Spain, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Portugal, and thus are more exposed to the debt crisis than the banks of any other country. Now that being said, the French and German economies are quite large, diversified, and frankly, just straight up strong. They can be compared to the economies of Japan and the UK in terms of strength. This means they are unlikely to economically collapse and break up the EU. However, the opposite can be true. If smaller and weak EU economies such as Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, Poland, and Greece did not attain average EU per capita income levels in the near future, coupled with increasing stress from Italy, Portugal, and Spain, Germany or France just might begin contemplating an exit from the EU, which can lead to a domino effect and collapse of the Union. Contrary to what many believe, the EU is very unlikely to collapse due to a lack of Russian oil and gas. The USA and Norway are already filling the gap, maybe at a higher price, but the gap is being filled. So what does this mean? It means a warm European winter with very weak consumer spending and economy due to the super high unjustifiable electricity, gas, and heating prices. The price of gas from the USA and Norway, among other countries, is up to 50% more expensive than Russian gas. By the way, this high prices issue, once coupled with the already ended shortage crisis, should translate into power and heating prices that are a maximum of 100% higher, not 500% and more. This leads us to a big question mark that no one seems to talk about. Why have the top European energy giants and their foreign counterparts who are supplying Europe been hitting record net profits since 2020 as if that was normal during the COVID pandemic or the current circumstances? Of course, these profits do mean that there is healthy demand and liquidity among the population to pay for gas and electricity. However, it is rather lame to blame the Ukraine war and high American gas prices for the 500% and up increase in electricity and heating costs. As we said earlier, 100% is justifiable, but not 500% and up. The reality is, 70% of the EU energy crisis can be blamed on the out-of-control gas and electricity market, which is infested with greed and total disregard for the emergencies storming the continent. The EU seems to be so helpless in the face of this greed problem. It merely announced recently a solidarity campaign in which it will force energy giants with operations in Europe to give up some of their profits to help EU citizens foot their power and heating bills during the winter. As for the recent problems with Nordstream 1 and 2 pipelines, they will not cause the crisis to magically intensify because the EU was mere weeks from totally giving up Russian gas. In conclusion, the EU is a solid bloc and has become even more solid since the Ukraine war. It cannot and will not collapse and is expected to speed up the applications of some states that want to join. That said, the EU can collapse only if the heavyweights did not pay more attention to poor and struggling states, which can become an unbearable burden. The collapse of Italy or Spain or Bulgaria and Poland combined can lead France or more likely Germany to exit the bloc, leading to a possible breakup. The rise of Russia and China on the world stage to levels that counter the USA global hegemony, petrodollar and SWIFT system, means that Europe has no choice but to remain united and move west, even if moving east is easier, cheaper, and more profitable in the short and long term. The big question now is, will the USA, Canada, and Norway lower their gas prices for Europe to match Russian prices? And will international and European energy giants tackle their own greed and corruption issues that are inflicting serious dents in the EU economy? Let's just wait and see.